Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and my first ever video on Power Rangers was made over 2 years ago, a top 10 best seasons video, and it certainly wasn't the best video, all things considered. Questionable rankings, wonky writing, no honorable mentions, yeah, it's a rough time to go back to. Needless to say, it demanded an update that was more in line with my current thoughts on the franchise. So, after countless months of telling you all that I'm updating it, let's finally jump right back in and discuss the very best of Power Rangers. Ninja Storm was the first season to really put a premium on intentional humor, and for my money, they made that at times overly absurd angle work more times than not. But it was also more than that. Ninja Storm knew how to entertain, and even obliterate the fourth wall at times, but it also knew how to utilize several of their characters in more meaningful ways. Dustin is our resident funny man here, complete with a trusting nature and a heart of gold. But then, Ninja Storm uses those defining traits against him when his trust leads to betrayal twice over, driving him to eventually reconsider what was a very clearly defined role. And nowhere do we see this more than with Cam, who had to overcome the legitimate worries of both his parents in order to take his place as the original Ranger Samurai. As I've stated before, Ninja Storm isn't gonna be for everyone. It's a very peculiar season, especially compared to the seasons adjacent to it. But that's exactly what it wanted to be, and that's where a lot of its quality stems from. One of the most interesting parts of the season that highlights just that was the General Vexicus arc. He was a far more sinister villain than Lothar and his nieces could ever hope to be. But they still get the better of him in the end. My thoughts on why are as follows. This very meta season was firmly stating that they don't need a more sinister villain because other seasons already have them. Instead, they actively work against Vexicus to re-establish the sillier villain hierarchy. A hierarchy that despite being silly, can still be dangerous in its own ways. Ergo, why they're the bad guys. The way Ninja Storm operates changed the way that Rangers could be presented by establishing self-referential humor as a powerful card to play. Dino Thunder, to a degree, but especially RPM, would then go on to build off that to even greater effect. It was that kind of ingenuity that helped keep the Ranger train rolling during a time where cancellation was once again a threat. But by hiring innovative producers that knew how to tell interesting stories, as well as fun ones, the ratings went back up and Rangers was kept relevant for years to come. Ninja Storm is a flawed season in a number of areas, but unlike the overwhelmingly plain Neo Saban era, it was never afraid to admit those flaws, and in many cases, even embrace them. Wild Force is one of those seasons that suffered a little bit when I went back to take a closer look at it. Doesn't make it a bad season, it's still on this list after all, but my analysis did expose a few key problem areas that I simply couldn't overlook. Problem areas other better seasons simply don't have. That being said, there's still a lot to love about what Wild Force did. As a team of Rangers, you have almost exclusively good or great characters, and several focus episodes did a great job at portraying, and at times challenging, those same Rangers, and they did it in a variety of ways. While Kite and the mutant lore in general don't do a great job at giving this season a strong thematic presence, it's made up for to an extent with strong story arcs, especially the almost season-long story arc of Master Org himself, slowly losing his humanity. This is countered by the also great story arc of the Lone Wolf, who also surrenders his humanity, but instead chooses to reform and repent. With the Master and Merrick/Zenaku, you see the best use of the orgs on a narrative level, allowing them to function as symbols for corruption by way of power, catalyzed by desperation. But Merrick rises above that, just as Danny rises above his fears through his best friend. Just as Taylor rises above a year of hardened fighting that nearly killed her ability to emote. They refuse to surrender themselves to what ails them, and that level of heart is really what makes Wild Force a top 10 season, an underappreciated aspect of Disney's first run at the franchise that is also perfectly embodied by their fearless leader. That heart was on full display when the world, and the franchise itself, was at risk of coming to an end again. but even with barely the clothes on their backs, they still fought on, in large part because of Cole's unrelenting, unapologetic, unwavering, undeterrable, unbreakable spirit, which gave us what still stands as one of the greatest Ranger moments ever. So while this season has a few choice problem areas in character dynamics, Princess Shayla existing, story consistency, and general narrative, it's also a fun and engaging ride from start to finish, where even the team-up episodes do extremely well to carry two different stories forward, and where the villain underlings develop into very empathetic characters, and having a yellow, red, and white Ranger that are all top-tier characters helps a lot too. For the record, yes, I am placing all 3 seasons in one space here. That does admittedly go against how I worked in one of my honorable mention entries, but I'm sure you'll all forgive me for that. What the original Ranger ride lacks in narrative or serialized storytelling, it makes up for with engaging characters, all of whom get the chance to shine multiple times throughout the 3-year run. That's part of why the original bunch are, and continue to be, some of the most memorable characters in the franchise, even beyond the powerful nostalgia. There's a certain simplicity that each abide by on the surface, but as early as episode 1, we start to unravel the layers underneath. And from those starting points, we continue to see each deal with very personal, and in many cases, very relatable conflicts. The absurdly lucrative toy sales probably help the most, but I think that humanizing aspect of the show is also a huge part of what has kept this franchise kicking for 25 years and counting, despite multiple threats of cancellation. Even Bulk and Skull become more complete characters over the 3-season run. That said, the thing that ends up hurting these seasons the most, just as far as my rankings go, is how episodic and overly lengthy they end up being. And because of that, a lot of the episodes we get might as well be filler, because sometimes even the lessons learned neither carry any weight nor are recalled 22 minutes later. But the biggest takeaway from the first Ranger series, and most good Ranger seasons, is that on top of the cool toys and on top of the martial arts, we can see these heroes for who they really are behind the helmets. Whether it was uncovering the familial connections that drive Trini, Billy advancing as a martial artist and a person, Kimberly struggling with choosing her Ranger life or her gymnastics dream, Adam overcoming his shortcomings with self-confidence, or seeing Jason and Tommy, 2 strong-willed leaders, put it all together even during the worst of times, the Mighty Morphin team had some of the best people in the franchise, and it still does. Space Patrol Delta sometimes feels overlooked with regards to just how great it was. Some of the most advanced storytelling ideas in the history of the franchise can be found right here. And it all ties back to the larger point of both s.p.d. as an organization and as a season. The point being nuance and understanding. We see the need for both, primarily through the spectacular way that Sky Tate methodically develops. With him, we see mistrust. We see a rigid conservative mindset. We see clear prejudice towards ideas and people that he doesn't fully understand. But we also see that his problematic initial mentality isn't rewarded because Doggy Kruger is the best at what he does. The not-so-distant future that s.p.d. resides in is conceived through the fact that Earth is more diverse now than at any point before. And because of that simple fact, rigid rarely cuts it. Androids, aliens, talking birds as bosses, there's no clear way to address every single situation an s.p.d. Ranger can face. And that's a good thing, because it forces every character here to look beyond what's easy and hone in on what's real. That's why 2 Criminals became some of the more interesting Rangers ever, especially Z, who always wanted to do something bigger and ran with the chance she got. But more than that, we see how her history led her to this point and how it assists in guiding the next generation. Adding to that, the brilliant way that obvious answers just don't work here is also highlighted through Bridge. Even though he doesn't develop as much as Jack or Sky, his divergent perspective was made to matter because he inherently understands the nuance they face, in large part because he is so multifaceted himself. And then we have Jack, who redefines the role by progressing from lazy power abuser to legitimate hero. And all of those points only scratch the surface of all the ways these Rangers, and us the audience, are pushed to think more completely about the world around us. And boom, one of the better supporting characters only bolsters that point. And it's only after Sky completes that thought process, and in doing so, internalizes the real purpose of s.p.d, that he's ready to lead, that he's ready to live out his lifelong dream of suiting up in his father's old color. All helped along by arguably the greatest Ranger mentor ever that saw to the progression of both him and most of his teammates. However, I can't call s.p.d a top 5 season, or even top 6 for that matter, not because it isn't great, but because it's not great all the time. Look no further than Sid's comparatively sparse contributions to the grander picture, and anything involving Omega Ranger. But more than even that, the back end of episodes, save Reflection of course, had a tendency to be of much lesser quality than the great opening episodes and the great early character episodes. I think it's still pretty close to top 5 status, even with all that, but hey, I love all of these seasons, so I gotta draw lines somewhere. Because on its best day, it's a season where damn near every character improves as time goes on, featuring a message of timeless importance, a message that many people could really stand to learn today. Dino Thunder has the dubious distinction of being the best anniversary season by several country miles, except it doesn't fall in a noteworthy anniversary year. It's a season that took everything the original Rangers did right with their run and made it better almost across the board. After the last few seasons departed from the schoolyard setting, we return to it here, but instead of a cast of morally straightforward characters, we're treated to more realistic, grounded depictions of mid-2000s kids that all come with their own baggage to sort through. And who better to help them sort through all that than the legend himself? Tommy's presence does take away a little bit from what otherwise could have been a team more firmly led by Connor, but beyond that, he proves to be just what the season needed. They could have gone hella overboard with the fan service here, made this entire season into a Tommy shrine, forever immortalizing the face of the franchise. And a lot of people would have been just fine with that, maybe even preferred it. But, to Dino Thunder's great credit, they instead made him a functional, but not overly so, part of a much bigger picture. The bigger picture being the mistakes of Anton Mercer, the monster he created as a result, and the tension/dramatic irony created through his dual nature, once revealed. The defining story elements are consistently great here, a statement I can't say as much about the seasons just below this one. But what really carries Dino Thunder are the characters. All of them start off as interesting almost immediately, but then there's always something for them to have to work through. In a downplayed way, we see this through Connor maybe most of all. He's the exact opposite of responsible to start, and struggles with adjusting his priorities. But as the season goes on, we see a gradual maturation process from him, transforming him from something of a goofball to a far more controlled, far more competent individual later on. You can tell it's not just girls and soccer driving him anymore, even beyond his big episode 3 moment. Mix that in with Ethan's clever sarcasm, almost everything Kira does, and Trent's captivating involvement from start to finish, and you've got one of the best teams ever constructed. A team that, in many respects, does take a lot of inspiration from its predecessors. An evil ranger under some kind of mind control? Yeah, we've seen that. But where a lazy season would have just left things there while praying nobody notices or remembers, Dino Thunder chooses to innovate. Instead of the mostly linear trajectory of one former evil Green Ranger, they create a psychological instability within Trent. A duality that, as we later learn, works as a parallel to what his father is going through. And it's only after every character here works through some kind of hurdle, in their own way, expelling something that might have been holding them down before, can this season come to a natural close. And yes, that also very much applies to the very underrated Cassidy Cornell, who, while overbearing, is allowed to be far more interesting than most characters in a similar role. Dino Thunder is what happens when the more simplistic, character-driven stories of yesteryear meet the more modern, more carefully crafted story-driven narratives of the Disney era. Two distinct schools of thought coming together to both literally and figuratively grant us the best of both worlds. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think we could have asked for a much better 12th anniversary celebration than that. And that was part 1 of the 10 best Ranger seasons. It'll be quite the trek getting all the way up the list, but I don't think it should be handled any other way, especially since my original video on this topic was way too short. So next time around, we'll of course talk top 5, but I'll also do something I've never done before, talk through the honorable mentions and how they ended up where they did. I think for a video like this, it'd be worth the added effort and the added discussion, especially since a few of you guys often ask me about my reasoning behind honorable mentions anyways, so everyone wins. And until then, thanks for watching.